What's happening, guys? In this video, I'm going to look at how to take a probability problem and visualize it through the use of a tree diagram. So probability is pretty tough to navigate. I've found through the years of teaching this class, visual representations work. Okay, take the problem that's just a whole bunch of words and transform it into something a little bit more useful. So this one we're going to focus on a tree diagram. So I have a survey of students was done, and it was found that 65% of students have a subscription to Netflix. Of those that have a Netflix subscription, 70% have Hulu. Of those that don't have Netflix, only 40% have Hulu. It says create a tree diagram. So how I kind of go about doing my business is I kind of look at what are the categories that they talk about? What things do they talk about? So there's talk of Netflix and there's talk of Hulu. So when I make my tree diagram, I'm going to break it apart and say, all right, the first branches are going to represent what is happening with Netflix. The second level of branches is going to deal with what is happening with Hulu. Okay, so things that they talk about with Netflix, if you read through that problem again, is they talk about students have a subscription to Netflix, and sometimes they mention those that don't have Netflix. So they either have a subscription or they don't. So how I'm going to represent that is I'm going to say sub for short, subscription, or they don't have a sub. So they either have a subscription to Netflix or they don't have a subscription to Netflix. Makes sense? Let's not touch the numbers yet. Let's just still continue to start putting this together. When you move on to Hulu, what they talk about, those that have a Netflix subscription, 70% have a Hulu subscription. So same kind of idea. You either have a subscription to Hulu or you don't. So we're going to branch out from my Netflix branches, branch out again under Hulu and say sub or no sub. So they either have a subscription or they do not have a subscription. Okay, so first thing I do is just kind of set up categories. Don't even worry about the numbers yet. Set up in categories what is going on. Okay, now I'm going to try and plug in numbers. And the way that these numbers kind of work is we use basic rules of probability here. We know all situations need to add up to 1. So that fact is going to help us a lot through here. So as we read through, we're going to read through and place numbers where they belong, and kind of like a puzzle, figure out what pieces go in our missing spots. So a survey of students was done, and it was found that 65% of students have a subscription to Netflix. So again, I like to work in decimals and not percentages. So I know 65% of students have a subscription to Netflix. So 0.65 should go under sub for Netflix. But again, those rules of probability, these are the two only outcomes under Netflix. Okay, so if 65% of students have a subscription to Netflix, that must mean 35 or 0.35 do not have a subscription to Netflix. And notice these two branches that are directly connected add up to 1. Okay, the branches that are directly connected add up to 1. Back to our problem. Of those that have a Netflix subscription, so we already know we're traveling down the Netflix branch, 70% have a Hulu subscription. So we're already down Netflix, go to Hulu, should be 0.70 for Hulu. Okay, these two branches are connected, and we know 70% have a subscription to Hulu, therefore should be 30%, or 0.7 plus 0.3 adds up to 1. 30% do not have a subscription to Hulu. Notice these two branches that are connected add up to 1. They're not connected right now with down here, so I'm not worried about all 4 of these adding up to 1 because see, it's separate branches here. Okay, continuing to read. Of those that don't have Netflix, so no subscription to Netflix, we're down here, only 40% have Hulu. So go down the sub for Hulu branch, and that should be 40%. These two branches are connected, so if this is 40%, down here must be 60% or 0.6. Okay, so that's a basic setup of your tree diagram. One thing I always do, just because I know kind of the nature of the questions that will be asked, that typically involve tree diagram problems, is I go ahead and multiply down the branches, okay? I multiply down these branches because I'm going to check one thing and I'm going to show you a little neat thing on how you know things are right. So I'm going to figure out what's the probability that someone has a subscription to Netflix and a subscription to Hulu. So subscription and subscription, which means we need to multiply 0.65 times 0.7. And you can do that in a calculator. I did the math for us to save some time. It's 0.455. I'm going to go down these branches, subscription and no subscription. So Hulu subscription and no Hulu subscription. So 0.65 times 0.3, which is 0.195. And you get the idea. No subscription and subscription, going to multiply there. No subscription and no subscription, going to multiply there. 0.35 times 0.4 is 0.14. 0.35 times 0.6 is 0.21. So these numbers account for the full length of these branches, the full length. So really, these four numbers are all connected back to the beginning. If you take these four numbers and you add them up, guess what? You get 1. Okay? When you multiply the full length of the branches, that adds up to 1. One last thing I'm going to show you before we go here is these two numbers are connected back to this point. These two numbers are connected back to this point. If you take 0.455 and 0.195 and add them together, guess what? You get 0.65. Down here, these two numbers are connected back to this no subscription point here. You add these two together, 0.35. Okay, so just some interesting things to see with tree diagrams. That is the setup for a tree diagram. In a future video, I'll talk about answering some questions using this tree diagram.